The fourth P, place or distribution. It really should be distribution, but like I said before, then it'd be three P's and a D, and then it wouldn't be so cool. The fourth P has two different parts to it. We're going to look at distribution channels, so how do you move the products? But then we're going to look at some physical distribution issues. But starting with distribution channels, these are the routes or the routes. You can say routes, but you got OUT there. It's out. You're not going to say oot. I'm going oot new. The routes used to move products. You start with direct channels where the producer sells directly to the final customer, which is pretty straightforward, right? The advantage is that that's the cheapest. If you want to put anyone in between you and the customer, it's going to cost money. If you are selling on the internet, it's even easier now because you can reach customers very, very, very easily through the internet. However, because now the internet is becoming more clogged, then you're starting to have to use intermediaries just to get higher on search engines and stuff like that. The disadvantage, though, is that if you are the producer, it's going to be difficult for you to reach all of your potential customers. And the question really in the end will be, should you even bother? Why don't you just focus on making the product really good and then let someone else do all the selling? And there are also limited ways of doing this. So, when I've been trying to promote these apps, what am I going to do? I don't have the budget to send out junk mail, once a week to every single school. There are very limited ways of trying to sell directly to the final customer, to market directly to the final customer. So there are limited ways of doing it, which might end up just annoying people and they'll turn against your product. Indirect channels are where you use intermediaries, right? So sometimes people go intermediaries. I'm just going to put that into me diary, but it's intermediaries, which are middlemen or middle people, middle women, middle persons. The three are wholesalers, retailers, and agents. So we'll start with wholesalers who buy large quantities and then sell them on to retailers, right? So you sell it to the wholesaler, wholesaler sells it to the retailer, retailer sells it to the customer. The advantage there is that you do then get access to smaller retailers. So if you are selling groceries or something like that, you might get access to the smaller ones, the smaller retailers that there's no way that you would, they don't have websites or anything like that. You couldn't even find out that they even exist. You couldn't travel to every single suburb and find them all, but the wholesaler does. The wholesaler has their phone number and will sell the product to them. Wholesalers are also better at maintaining those relationships with those smaller retailers. The disadvantage, though, is that it's obviously going to add to the price. So your product is going to become less competitive because now you have to sell it at either a lower price to the wholesaler or the wholesaler has to sell it at a higher price to the customer. And either way, you're going to be losing money there. The second type of intermediary is a retailer. A retailer will buy the product from you and then they'll sell it straight to the final customer. The advantage is that retailers are well known and they're very, very convenient because they're often everywhere. So a retailer might be like Harvey Norman, right? They are going to be very well known. They're going to be very convenient because they're all over the place. And because they're so well known and because they're everywhere, if you can get a retailer to stock your product, it is going to increase your brand awareness, which is why places like Coles and Woolworths they actually charge they're retailers. They charge businesses to put their product at the end of the aisle or in certain places to try and because they know that it increases your brand awareness. If you're at the end of every aisle of every Woolworths in New South Wales, then that is going to increase your brand awareness. The disadvantage though is that it's expensive. It adds even more to the price from when you started, and retailers are often very, very expensive. They have high overheads, they have marketing costs and all that sort of stuff, where you might just be producing. You might just be a factory producing things, producing products or whatever. So it's gonna make it much, much more expensive than selling it directly. But you're hopefully going to make many, many more sales. The third and the often forgotten indirect channel is using an agent. Agents are a little bit tricky because agents just arrange the transaction between the producer and the customer. Right? So if you think of a real estate agent doesn't buy a house from the customer and then try to sell it to someone else. The real estate agent acts in the middle. They just arrange the buying of the house and the selling of the house. They just act as the middle person when someone's trying to sell their house. The advantage there is that a real estate agent is going to be better at knowing individual customer needs. If you've only owned one house in your life, this will be your first time selling a house, so you're not going to know what the customers want or customers need. No matter how much lifestyle channel you watch, it's still going to be a struggle for you. The disadvantage, though, is that agents receive commissions. So for each house that they sell, they're going to get a commission, and that's going to increase the price. So that's why you see these signs around going, we buy houses, very very cheap. We buy houses, using cash, because they don't want to make sure that they don't have to pay those commissions. When it comes to channel choice, this is the question of how many locations or shops. And the way the syllabus breaks it down is they've got intensive channel choice, which is using lots of different businesses. This is for when you want really, really wide exposure. You want the highest possible number of sales. But it means that you're going to lose control over the sales process. If you're not actually doing the selling yourself, if you have 100 different retailers that are selling the product, you're going to start losing control over that sales process. Maybe the people are not going to know the product as well. You can't really train every single person who's going to sell exactly what you need to tell them. So you're going to lose a little bit of control over the sales process. The selective channel choice is where you sell it to you have a few locations where you can buy the product. This is where you get a little bit more control over the sales process. You also have a bit of control over the intermediaries, because you can say, hey, look, you and this other store and a handful of others, these are the only places where this gets sold. So we do have a little bit of power over you. The product is also going to seem a little bit more prestigious, because I want this perfume. It's like, well, that's only sold in these types of stores. Oh, wow, that must be fancy. Whereas Coca-Cola is not selective about that sort of thing. They're just going to go, okay, well, it's everywhere. It's not really prestigious. I'm not really going to say, oh, wow, I got a can of Coke. Wow, look, these are so rare. But the disadvantage is obviously that if you have it in fewer stores, you're going to have less exposure for your product and for your brand. It's also going to be inconvenient for customers. So if it is a perfume that is only sold in some places, the customer might actually say, you know what, this other perfume that is available everywhere, this is the one that's in front of me right now, so I'm going to buy it. But for products like perfume, people have very, very specific tastes. So that's something that you can say, you know what, we're going to be a little bit selective. Even if it's a bit inconvenient for customers, we reckon they're going to drive to the other store to buy it. The extreme version is exclusive, where you've just got one store. This is where you have complete control over the sales process, and it becomes very, very prestigious. So like Louis Vuitton or something like that. The disadvantage is obviously very limited exposure, but for luxury products especially, your prestige is the most important thing to you. So you don't really need more exposure. Your exposure is in your exclusivity. That's what gives you your name. So you might actually want to limit the exposure, limit the number of customers, and then sell it at a much, much higher price. The other side of the place or the distribution issue are the physical distribution issues. And we've got three. We've got transport, warehousing, and inventory that the syllabus requires you to look at. So starting with transport, really your choices are air and or road transport, or water and or rail transport. You can use a combination of these, but air and road are faster and more flexible than water and rail. But water and rail is cheaper, right? So obviously roads are much more flexible because you can transport it to basically anywhere that you want within the country. And you can't really do that by rail. You can't just go, okay, I'm just going to move the train into a suburb that doesn't have a train station. And in terms of water, it's obviously going to be cheaper to get a giant, container ship of things, taken over the water rather than trying to, fly them all in lots of different planes over a long period of time. But in the end, even though you've got those advantages there, the decision really depends on what the type of product is and what the individual customer's needs are. So you may end up having to pay for air transport just because the customer needs it quickly, rather than you really wanting it to be, cheaper or, whatever. You may not want to do it, but the customer's needs are going to have to come first. The type of product can also be something that might spoil quickly or whatever, so you might need to transport it faster. The second physical distribution issue is warehousing. So this is, where do you store your stocks, your inventory? The choice is really between two alternatives. You can have more warehouses, which are going to be closer to the customers, but it's going to be more expensive. Or you can have less warehouses, which is going to be cheaper, but it's going to be less convenient for the customers. If you have a warehouse just around the corner, then if you run out of stock, you can you can say to the customer, look, give us 5 minutes. If you have one warehouse in South Australia, you're going to be out of luck with that customer. The third and final issue for physical distribution is inventory. And this is, how much stock do you keep? Not necessarily where do you keep it, but how much. You have to keep some in case there's a sudden increase in customers, but you don't want to keep too much. And there's three problems with keeping too much inventory, too much stock. Warehouses are very, very expensive, especially in suburban areas and built-up areas. There's also a danger of the product becoming obsolete, so out of date, or spoiled. So you don't go, okay, I'm going to buy 1,000 of these computers and then I'm just going to sell them over the next 10 years, because in 10 years it's going to be completely obsolete. Same thing goes with food and things like that. It's going to be spoiled. There's also the problem that inventories or stock, that's an investment that's just sitting there. So you might be better off keeping the money in the bank and then buying new stock as you need it, rather than just buying a whole bunch of stock and just waiting for it to gather dust. That is an investment. It is a current asset that's just sitting there. So you need to be careful about having too much inventory.